All right. Now we're going to start with the preamp. Hit the little 0 dB with the knob. We'll get to the preamp screen. Not too much here. Source select S-Link socket 13. That means this getting the information from the snake, channel 13. If you need to change this for some reason, you'll hit it, and then you'll use this soft rotary here. This is the thing that you can use to adjust a lot of details. And we'll see what it actually changes per screen. It's different, but this is like the all-in-one, the utility, the selector scroll. So this is basically the only way you'll be able to change it unless you're using the app. So gain, library to load preamp model. So if you hit library and go into factory and load the tube stage, it'll actually load up the tube stage emulation. So it'll be like a tube, like amp emulator or modeler, whatever you want to call it. And you got several modes here. Got pentode, triode, warm pentode, dual pentode, triode, and high drive. This will change what the character is. If you don't turn it on, it's not going to do anything. For acoustic guitar, we probably don't want any of this. So hit the library, no model, recall, and it's blank. Same thing with the vocals. I generally turn it off. If you want a warmer sound to the vocals, you can possibly apply this. Really haven't noticed too much in the actual live setting, but who knows? Going back to acoustics, let's see, 48 volt. If you're using an active DI, you want to hold it to turn on the Phantom. I don't think it'll turn it on because there's nothing connected into it. If I go into local socket, not unassigned, local socket 1, apply, then I can actually hold. Now Phantom Sound 48 volt is on. Generally, this is off unless your equipment needs like an active DI or a condenser microphone. If you actually happen to connect a XLR pair into 3.5 millimeter and turn on the Phantom, that's the easiest way of frying an electronic equipment, because the most consumer equipment, your phone, the dongles, the 3.5 millimeter jack isn't set up to handle the 48 volts. Delay, if you toggle the delay, the delay is delayed at the source, which means whatever delay that I apply here, it'll apply into the personal mixer, it'll apply into the in-ear mix. Generally, we turn it off unless there is an actual need for it. Trim is like a digital gain. So after the analog gain up here on the actual number, you see that gain 28 dB, that's the actual analog gain, socket gain. If you trim it, it kind of adds the digital gain. I really don't know when you would use it. Actually, you might want to just kind of like fine tune it a little bit. Generally, for the most part, leave it alone. Polarity, also that'll invert the signal. Very few cases you'd actually use it. The only time you would actually use it if you're snaring, if you're miking a snare top at the bottom, you're capturing the same sound source. And mixer will see one signal going up, down, the other signal going down, up. If it's close enough, it'll actually cancel out the signal. So in those cases, when you're miking two sources together, but you don't want to cancel out the signal, then you would actually invert one of the signals by hitting the polarity like so. And you can see POL minus, that means the polarity is inverted. If it's like that, POL, that turns off your normal signal. For the most part, unless you're miking things really close to each other, like two speaker microphones on a podium, for instance, and you want to capture both, not do like one backup for the other, then you might want to use the polarity. That's the gain. The pad, you're inputting a line source as opposed to mic level source. That's about 20 dB difference. I'm going to hit it here. And you can see it drops down to 8 dB as opposed to 28. And if I actually gain that down, minus 20 to 40 as opposed to 60 to 0. So that's minus 20 dB if you're getting things that's like super hot, and if you need to down 20 dBs into something that's reasonable. I'm going to actually return, this doesn't really matter because once I load the default scene from last week, it'll go back to what it was. But if you need to, say, go back into the S-Link, hit S-Link, 13, hit apply, and then boom. Again, you see that go to 0, and you don't see any of these socket preamp options because there's nothing connected to it. High pass filter. We'll go into that into the EQ setting. We'll go into the gate now, and you can see once the gate is engaged, it'll see all of the sound. There's nothing coming in, so it's going to cut it out. If we disengage the gate, nothing. Attack, how fast you want the gate to open or close. Hold, how long to hold the gate open, and release after amount of what time the gate goes back to working. For the acoustic guitar, you don't want to really engage the gate unless necessary. Let's go into the drums. So we're gonna attack at 91 microseconds. That's pretty fast. You want the initial thump, thump, thump of the drum to come in. And we're gonna hold it for 150 milliseconds. That'll let the most of the drum sound in, and then release at 200 milliseconds. And the threshold is at minus 30 dB. So it's got to be a good, strong signal to actually release the gate. So thump, thump, thump. So you want the most of the thump to come in, but you don't want anything else to bleed in. Then this is where you would actually engage the gate. Hand waving a lot of stuff. Some of the stuff we don't use at all, so it's okay. Going into the EQ now. So this is where you got all the EQ. If you highlight this, it turns yellow. Then you can really fine tune each of the individual parameters using this little knob here, this yellow knob. That's what it's for. If I unselect anything, if I go into a different, it turns off. We'll get into compressor now. Let's see. This is basically a little tool that it'll automatically bump up the volume up to a certain level, and then after a certain level, it'll kill the volume. 186 millisecond, relatively slow attack, really fast release. So you just want to get most of the signal, but you don't want it to super peak. Ratio is a 3:1, so it'll kind of, once it hits minus 10 dB, it'll squash the volume relatively hard. We're giving it a gain about 4 dB of gain, so because the compressor does have the tendency to kind of really kill the volume a little bit, so we're just making it up a little bit. This right here, it'll show you how the compressor is behaving over a certain time. Parallel path, you can actually add some of the dry pre-uncompressed signal along with the compressed signal. If I turn it on and say I want about 10 dB with a little bit of that, so kind of like same amount of dry and wet signal, then you get a little bit of compressed signal along with the dry signal. Nor, for the most part, not needed. Going to the EQ now. So you can kind of see the EQ, then compressor. So in this mixer, it's basically EQ, then compressor. There might, I haven't really delved deep into the mixer to see if we can compress, then EQ. X32, M32, other high-end mixers, you can compress the signal before the EQ, or you can EQ, then compress. So this is all touch. So going back into the high frequency now. If I disengage the high pass filter, it's just gonna let the entire signal in from 0 dB, 0 hertz, or minus 20 hertz to 20K. If I engage it, right now it's at 215. It kind of starts to cut stuff about 80 or so. Anything below 80, it's going to ignore it and then just kind of slowly add things in. And you can see with the little green here, if I do this, it'll ignore. It says 382 or so. It just kind of starts processing most of the signal around 380 hertz or so, but it'll still let some of the signal in, as it's indicated by this little green chart here. And you can either do this or do that. And notice that this gives me a finer control as opposed to this. This is a really rough control. So you can see each turn of the knob, or each value, increases by 30 hertz, whereas with this, a single hertz. So this is a rough control, fine control. So low frequency, low medium, high frequency. I'm just going to concentrate on one of the bands with the exception of high frequency and the low frequency. This is how much, so this is the Q, or the curve, the width. And you can actually touch, if you can grab the point, and you can manipulate the frequency like so. But this is the only way to get into a high shelf or low shelf. It's going to just the better word is going to apply a certain amount of gain or cut after a certain frequency at about, and that's going to do that equally. So here at 219 hertz, it's going to cut 6 dBs. indiscriminately, whereas here, if I do this, it's going to add 15 dBs starting from 219 and then gradually taper off. And that's going to depend on the width of the other bands. The Q, and this is the only way you see all the width, frequency, and gain, but this is really the only way that you can actually adjust, get into the, because you can do this, you can get from 1/9 into 1.5 for your width, but you can't get into shelf unless you actually highlight it and then use the fine toggle. So you got 1/9, got the shelf, but if I were to use the actual width knob, I can't do that even if I wanted to. Now I can get it from 1.5 to 1/9. Let me just kind of drag it out. So it's kind of 1/9 is really a precise cut, and 1.5 is a very broad cut, but I can't get into the shelf unless I use the detailed, the fine knob. The frequency is the actual frequency, and the amount to cut, that's the gain, how much to cut. We'll go into so that's kind of self-explanatory in and of its own. If you use PEQ function on one of the mixers, it's kind of the same, with the exception that while you have the high pass filter, it doesn't have the low pass filter. So low pass filter is, it'll let up to a certain amount and then it'll ignore anything after a certain amount, kind of like a high frequency shelf, but well, basically high pass filter, it'll ignore certain things below a certain frequency and then let everything else in, vice versa. Unfortunately, this mixer does not have that function. I think you can get to -15 dB, which isn't the best, it wasn't the worst, but it's not a low pass filter, so you can't really do a good sub control, for example. Alright, so I think that covers the basics of the EQ. Get into compressor. You can also toggle these functions with in and out, but you probably don't want to do that during the mix. So basically, you'll tap these functions to get into the screen. Compressor is engaged. We talked about the compressor. So that is the channel processing for the single channel.